There are a ton of different networking tools that you will actually use as an IT professional. Find out what those are next.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Who doesn't actually like working with different tools? Well, in networking, there are plenty of them. And here, Mr. Wes Bryan is going to actually help us to understand them more. So what are we going to talk about?
Sure, we're going to be looking at some tools that we use to create our twisted pair cabling as well as test those cables, maybe even find those cables when we need to. We're also going to look at some things that we can utilize in order to analyze and test out our wireless networks too.
All right, there looks like a ton of different tools over there on the bench. Why don't we head on over?
All right, everyone, come on over here and join me. And that is right. We're going to look at a variety of tools here. And I'm going to start on this side over here. It's going to be my left. And we're going to work our way across the board. And really, a first few of these, I would say, really about this much of them are all dedicated to doing things like creating and testing cabling. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the first one they call out. This is what they call out as a cable stripper. All right, and what this does is this allows you to remove, if we take a closer look at this allows you different sizes, if you will, to remove the outer protective coating from the conductors inside of a twisted pair cable. And it's important to be able to identify that because that helps us to remove things like the shielding from the cable. Now, when we need to apply things like our RJ45 jacks, right, our Ethernet cables, we need to have the appropriate plastic connectors at the end. That's called termination, if you will, but it's essentially just attaching a connector to the end of the cable that's going to be plugged into an RJ45 jack on your network adapter, your motherboard, or if you will, maybe ports on a switch. And in order to properly attach those ends, we use something like this. This is called a cable crimper. And this one right here is a more popular brand. This is a Klein crimper. And one of the things that you're going to notice right here is we've got a series of the RJ jacks, if you will, the registered jacks, right? This one right here is going to be our 8P8C RJ45 jack for Ethernet. Then we have a smaller one right there, and that is the RJ11 jack. That's our 4P4C connector, and that's used for things like telephone lines, dial-up connections, if you will. And what we do is we would arrange the conductors into the back of the RJ45 jack, put the connector on in here, and then crimp it down, and it attaches the connector to the cable. And one of the great things about it is it allows this crimper allows the conductors that are in the connector to pierce the jacket, making connection to the copper conductors inside, thereby allowing us to create a cable itself. Now, there's another type of crimper that I would also be aware of. You might work in an area where maybe you're doing coaxial cabling as well. This is another type of crimper here. This is a coaxial crimper, and this allows you to crimp cables, if you will, on things like your RG6 and RG59 cables. So a couple different types of cable crimpers when it comes to the variety of copper cabling that you might have to make these cables for.
Yeah, creating cables a lot of times, right, should be a rite of passage for somebody who's actually working on the A plus, exam or actually trying to do it for the first time. In other words, at least make one using some of these tools, and that will get you experience. Most of the time, when you're actually working in an environment, more than likely it will be the idea of speed and cost versus your time in creating cables. If you're actually wiring an entire building and you have to make 500 of these things, you might find out the time and the effort behind it is actually going to be worth you actually paying for it instead. Now, Wes, once we actually have this cable created, we plug it in and it should just magically work, but we should do something with it before we actually say we're going to put it into use, right? And that's where we start moving into the realm of testing.
That's right. What was the saying? Trust but verify, right? And if you've ever wired a cable like I have, chances are you might actually have to start over again because you think it's good, but then when you go to test it, your cable tester doesn't actually let you know that it's good. And that's the next one. These are cable testers, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. This is a small one that we have, and you can see what it does is it allows you to test RJ45 and RJ11 jacks. And what we have here is one section is going to be where you connect one end of the cable. You can see the RJ11, the RJ45 and the RJ11 jacks there. And I would connect one end of the cable into this box, and then turn it on, and we've got a series of LEDs, and the LEDs would flash and let me know which conductors are wired right, and it would light up these LEDs. But before I did that, I would take the other end of the cable and I would plug it into this side. And what we would do is we could verify that the cables are wired correctly, wired according to the standard, and that we can send a signal through them. So cable testers, this is a wired Ethernet and PSTN line, or the old telephone jack cable testers. So these, again, come in a variety of sizes, but they allow you to test the cabling. They also let you to test, maybe you're not making a cable. Maybe you have a cable that somebody calls in and they say, I'm getting some intermittent performance, intermittent connectivity loss, right? We find out maybe somebody set a cable down or a desk down on the corner of a cable, right? We need to diagnose and troubleshoot them. We could use a cable tester to see if those cables are actually, still maintaining their integrity. So very handy tool to have, and one I would be able to identify.
Yeah, along with that type of tester, which is good at actually verifying that the cable was made correctly, but there are times where it's also something that we need to do is verify that we're actually going to be testing the right cable too, and that becomes a little bit more difficult, especially in places like wiring closets where you actually have bundles of cable as well. So Wes, what type of tool do we use there?
All right, this is generically called in the industry the Fox and the Hound, more commonly called the tone generator, and it's really in combination. They talk about a toner probe, right? The toner probe is only really one half of the equation here, because a toner probe, I've got a couple of these toner probes right here. So we can see that generically they are called wire trackers, right? Here's another cable tracker. This is actually the toner probe, if you will, and you can see that it's got a tip on it, and it goes with an associated base. All right, and this base is what's known as the tone generator. You can see right here that what this would do would allow me to connect this to the cables, and then like Ronnie said, I could take this part of it, the toner probe, and I could go into that server closet and I could touch it to a series of the cables, the different cables. Ronnie said maybe hundreds of cables coming out of a bundle, and I could touch it to each one until it would do something like this. If I could show you closely, we can see this one actually light up. If I turn this one on, you're going to notice that it's got a blinking light, right? And what will happen is it lets me know that it's sending signal. And when I come to the cable and it locates the appropriate cable, what is going to end up happening, hopefully, is we're going to see that we have a blinking light. Now let's do transparency here. It's generating the signal, and because I'm so close to the signal, that's why it's detecting. And notice as I get away. But that's the same thing that would happen in your server closet. I would touch that to that cable, and when it found the right one, you can hear the little sound that it makes. It lets me know that I've found the appropriate cable. Like I said, in the industry generically, they call it the Fox and the Hound for certification endeavors and support endeavors. Remember, it's a toner probe with a tone generator as well.
Yeah, these are very handy when you are working with a lot of different cables that aren't labeled exactly properly, and you're still having to trace down that one. And then from that point, you can use that cable tester to verify if the cable is also wired correctly, if you happen not to have been part of the premise wiring team that actually put everything together too. Now, even with that, right, we also have to actually think about that idea of premise wiring when we start talking about creating a termination point. So what do we use there?
Sure, Ronnie. So you talked about that. Let's follow along the cable trail here. Ronnie, you mentioned that big bundle of cable coming into your server closet maybe has hundreds of twisted pair implementations, right? Well, where do they actually connect, if you will, in your server closet? Well, what they do is they're hardwired with each individual wire inside of each cable being hardwired into the back of what's known as a patch panel. Well, how do we strip off the outside coating like our cable stripper does, embed and then cut off the excess when we're embedding those wires into the back of a patch panel? Well, that's where this little device comes in, and this is what's known as a punch down tool. Now, let me see if I can get this. There we go. All right, and what you're going to see is that it's got an impact adjustment, and what that does is how far down out this the tip will go, and you'll see that there's like a V shape on that tip, and that V shape actually has a little blade in it. And what we do is we press down on the conductor within the back of the patch panel. And what you'll hear, let me see if I can make it, you'll hear that click. That's why it's called a punch down tool. And it strips, it embeds, and then cuts off with this little blade the excess. Now, Ronnie, I have to give people a little bit of a warning here. And when I first got in, well, Ronnie's already laughing. He knows where I'm going with this one. When I first got into the industry, I didn't pay attention to which side. And let me show you here. You might get a kick out of this. If you can see, do you see the little scissors option? That lets you know which way is going, which side is going to be cut off when it comes to the excess that's trimmed off after you punch it down into the back of the patch panel. Well, if you don't have that scissor on the right side, then what you do is you strip, embed, and then trim and cut it back out of its connection point. So make sure that you have it turned the right way so that when you embed it and punch it down, the excess is actually cut off and you don't turn around and just cut the wire back off of the patch panel. Live and learn, I've been there, but that's your punch down tool. It's used to terminate wires in a server closet to the back of a patch panel.
All right, we also hear the use, at least we used to hear the use of the idea of a loopback plug. What does that help us to do?
Sure. So the loopback plug, it really isn't fancy. Like all the tools that we have out here, this one you almost can't see. So thank goodness we can take a little bit of a closer look, right? A loopback plug is essentially made up of an RJ45 jack that takes the transmit pins and sends them out and back into the receive pin. So what we have is this loop that's created between the transmit pins within a network adapter and the receive. You might say TX, RX, send and receive. So what does that allow us to do? Well, that allows me to test the electrical capabilities of the network adapter. See, we have other technologies logically in software that we can find out, does the network adapter know its name in software? And that's where we use network utilities like the ping utility to ping our loopback address. But that all stays in software. That doesn't actually test the physical capability. Can the network adapter actually send an electrical communication out? And that's where the loopback plug comes in. The loopback plug allows you to plug it into the RJ45 jack of the network adapter in question, and you can do things like run your ping utility that sends a little electrical communication out of the adapter, loops it back in, and we can verify that yes, the network adapter from a physical electrical standpoint is functioning the way it should be.
Yeah, you may also, of course, end up using a specialized type of loopback at times on certain devices where it says, hey, for this device to work, it needs to be plugged in. If you don't have another device to plug it in, one of the ways you can kind of trick it is to actually use something like that loopback plug to make it think it's actually really connecting to another device.
Oh, that's
so
a sleight of hand.
It is kind of neat to actually be able to do. Now, along with that, though, we start to actually now have to think about the idea of analyzing data a little bit more. Tell us about the idea of a network tap.
Yeah, so a network tap, this can be a relatively cheap device all the way up to a very expensive device. And network taps, what they allow us to do, I want you to think of tapping into the network. I know it seems obvious, and I apologize, not talking down to anybody, but imagine a way that we've got a cable that's sending signal into a device and then a cable that's sending signal out of that device, right? Well, if I put a tap in between it, I plug into one side of the tap, I plug an RJ45 jack and then an RJ45 jack on the other side, and it runs into the device, I can now listen in on the communication from source to destination from a specific device. So what I can do is I can use it to analyze if communications are happening. Now, understand we can also do that to monitor traffic as well. It's not the only thing. We're not talking about, hey, we're just eavesdropping on everybody. But what it is it allows us to test that network communications, maybe from a specific device, are happening the way we expect them to do. And we can also troubleshoot it if they're not.
You know, by using a network tap, it also gives us the ability to tap into that traffic, but not also cause some type of congestion. So normally if we actually have to capture traffic somewhere, it has to go somewhere, then we can actually capture it. And then, you know, at times it slows things down. With a network tap, we essentially unplug those cables, we plug them in, and that way we can actually capture the data as it goes through those cables and not really slowing anything down in that sense. Now, the reason why we wanted to mention that is because it may be like the only way for us to do it is what we used to call splicing into that physical cable. Well, then we damage the cable. So by using a network tap, we actually say we can do this without damaging it and still get the same information out. Now, Wes, all this is actually good for physical connections, right? Creating the cable, being able to actually test it, all that's actually good. But most of the people are on wireless today. What do we do with that?
Yeah, that's right. You know, we've been looking at more of the bounded media aspect, right, within network communications, but we also have to say, well, what about unbounded media, if you will? Communications that travel through the air, like wireless. Wireless communications, we have another tool out there, and this is a really cool tool, and there's a lot of free ones out there that I would encourage you as maybe exam candidates or maybe support candidates, if you will. Maybe you're getting in the help desk role to go out there and download a Wi-Fi analyzer. I'm actually in my Windows 10 machine, and I've downloaded one that's right from the Microsoft Store, and this is just very generically, it's called Wi-Fi analyzer, right? It really isn't anything, the name isn't too spectacular. But what it allows me to do is it allows me to get some details about our network, right? I can see what the signal strength is relative to my network adapter locally here. I can see what the network name is, channels, the frequency. You can see the protocols that are being used, the encryption or security that's being used, a lot of different information, right? But we can go a little bit farther than that too, because we can actually do, well, imagine this, just like the name says, we can analyze the network as well. And to let you know, what we're looking at here is a 5 gigahertz spectrum. And we can see the various access points that are broadcasting their signals across the variety of the 5 gigahertz spectrum here. I could also do this, I could change this over and we could look at, like, for instance, the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, and we could see a variety of access points that are broadcasting on that frequency as well. And it's a very good way to just get an overall analysis of your wireless network, the signal strength, the surrounding wireless network, so that you can make plans and decisions and even troubleshoot and diagnose the wireless networks within your infrastructure. So Wi-Fi analyzer, very, very handy utility. You can even go as far, and what I've done, and I know Ronnie's done before, we've actually gotten these on our phones before if we didn't want our laptops, and we could use these and walk around and we could find the various signal strengths of the multiple access points that we have here inside of the IT Pro TV network. I would suggest you all out there as well. Get familiar with a Wi-Fi analyzer. You don't have to be experts in it, but it is a fabulous tool to have at your disposal, and much of these other tools that you're going to be able to identify, be able to explain their purposes. Whether you're in exam or a support role, you'll be doing well.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.